Order.
There he goes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. This is Tuesday, February 8th. It's a meeting of the Cornwall Planning and Zoning Commission. Called to order at 7:05 p.m. with regular members Anna Tamel, Phil West, Christine Gray, James Laporta, and Steve. Where did Steve go? Steve Sicardi. There he is. We will seat Bruce Bennett for regular member Keith Bodwell. The first item on our agenda is approval of the minutes of January 11th, which you received just only a few days ago. I have personally read through them and made some amendments before you even saw them, and I feel that they're ready to be approved. If anybody else has, we'll talk about it under discussion. James is moving. Any seconds that we accept the minutes? Christine is seconding. Any discussion? All in favor of the minutes as written, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Bruce? Thanks. Next agenda item, new applications. There are none. Unless something came in last minute, Karen?
No, the one thing I did not put on was the first of the two farmers markets. I have some more work to get the permits put together to get out to the applicants to make, with the original permits. So those will be on the March meeting. And everything else I have, I'll kind of discuss under my zoning officer.
Okay. Next agenda item, pending applications. There are none. So we'll move right on back to Karen to staff reports.
I simply wanted to say, and Anna and I started to discuss this based on the fact that there is a fair amount of chatter but good chatter out in the public regarding accessory apartments and the consideration of accessory apartments and where various towns are going. And I was on the phone with 3 different folks today regarding Cornwall's position on accessory apartments, and most everybody is very pleased to hear, based on their familiarity with other towns, that Cornwall is very progressive, very forward-thinking, always has been, and is certainly not going to hold off from keeping people from moving forward on applying for accessory apartments. And I want to point something very interesting out, because this was a conversation I had with Gordon. In many, many towns, permitting can be a lot more difficult than it is here in Cornwall. It can be a lot more expensive than it is here in Cornwall. And a special permit to come in for a detached accessory apartment right now with the cost of $150 is half of what other people might pay in another town for just a simple zoning permit. Everybody I've talked to has found that the answers that I have given them reason to move forward, to start thinking about it, start to get perk tests and move forward on doing some things that they want to do. So I think they know that the commission is working to address some of the kind of little idiosyncrasies because of the new state statutes and, opting out, whatever. But I think you're going to see some very positive progression forward in the next couple of months. And the other thing too, in conversations, again, with some people with closings, there is another 2 home-based business permits. One of them I have already started on, another one is forthcoming. It was a conversation with the attorney about the fact that we discovered a new accessory apartment, because he thought it was a 1-bedroom studio over garage, and it's actually a 3-bedroom apartment over garage, which is coming online. That was a septic approval piece, and he's talking about his client wanting to have a business. So we're starting on the paperwork for the home-based business as well as part of the permit. So I try to be positive, and I don't have to try very hard these days.
Great, Karen. Thank you very much. By the way, for everybody's interest about accessory apartments, I plan to ask Karen to put a discussion of when we are going to talk about them. We'll discuss that at our March meeting in order to be able to deal with the January 2023 deadline for a decision about which aspects of the new statute we're going to incorporate and which we are not. Next item on the agenda is correspondence and communications. Do you have any, Karen?
I do not have anything that has come directly to the commission. No.
I will just mention that this afternoon, Rob Phillips, director of Northwest Hills COG, sent out a letter that the 5th Thursday planned for the end of March, where Mike Zitzka was going to talk about the new statute, has been postponed.
Oh, thank you, Anna. I didn't check my emails when I came home. It's probably
Okay, I had planned to encourage everybody to go because he will be discussing this new law that we all have to know as much as we can about. And, you know, reading laws is not what we really signed up for here, but he can help us a lot.
I'm here to help too.
Yeah,
Janelle,
that's right.
Janelle,
Okay.
was this your idea for our first 5th Thursday?
Yes, yeah.
Thank you.
Good work.
You're welcome.
Next agenda item, other business. Anybody have anything? Okay, then we will move in to our planning workshop. Are you going to be sharing your screen, Janelle?
Absolutely. Yeah. Before I bring my screen up, does anyone, especially for members that missed a meeting or joining us new, any questions before we begin? Okay. I know the materials have been circulated. What I have updated now are page numbers so that one can look at where some of the regulations are being excerpted from and organized. So you will see the original regulations that I'm referring to are the ones available on the website. Those were effective, I believe, July 1 of 2021. So just to make sure that we're all referencing the same document. But without further ado, let me share my screen.
Just, you all know I'm fascinated by history, so I've got a few little things to add just about what we're working on right now, the definitions. In 1953, there were exactly 2 definitions in the Cornwall zoning regs. That was what is a non-conforming use and what is a trailer camp, which is a fascinating little look at what was important to people at that time. By 1985, when they had a big major overhaul of the regs, we had 24. The regulations we're currently using now that are up to date up to July 1st, 2021 have 34 regulations, and Janelle's version has 57. So clearly, we're working hard to improve clarity about what we mean when we say something. Carry on, Janelle, it's all yours.
Perfect. So where should we begin? I believe we were at buildable lot, moving up into building.
That's the only, oh boy, we have a lot to do.
Yes, yeah, we do. So the building is actually an updated definition with structure.
Can you enlarge that a bit?
Sure, yes. And I know everyone at home might be viewing from a different type of device, so just let me know what works for everybody. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yes, so building is a new definition. I can read it verbatim.
I don't think you need to. We have it in front of us.
Fantastic, great.
Seems to me that it's very straightforward.
Okay, and then we get into building coverage, because building coverage comes into play in the next section that we'll be discussing, dimensional requirements. So oftentimes we do talk building coverage when it comes to lots. And then cabin has been adapted just to make it more of an enforceable definition. As written in the current regulations, there's mention of not being occupied for more than, I believe, 180 days, which for Karen or for any land use agent would be pretty arduous to discern whether or not that's the case. So my suggestion is just taking out that time frame within the definition and just approaching it so that it's used recreationally or seasonally, less so that very specific time frame.
Great. You forgot business, and that's new.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just jumped right over that. Yes. So business is brand new. And any thoughts on the definition that's suggested here?
Barter is an interesting term, Janelle.
I know.
I used to have patients here in Cornwall who would barter for my services when I had an office.
Mhm,
It still is out there.
mhm, mhm.
So Janelle, you're including, if I can ask here, the
Sure.
storage of goods associated with commercial activity.
I'm
So would
glad
you-
somebody brought that up. Yes. Yeah.
So are you considering that if a building is being used for storage, that would be considered a business building?
That's what this would be suggesting. Yes.
If it's somebody else's stored equipment, correct?
It's even if it's yours right there.
Yeah, it sounds a bit odd.
But so in completion, it includes the storage of goods associated with commercial activity.
Okay. Obviously,
Okay.
goods and not tools or. And what are goods?
I read goods as all inclusive, more of a broad, the broad term.
What's the intent?
So, I mean, if I read it like that, if I park my work truck in the garage, then it's a business.
Right?
Mm-mm.
Well, should we include a word like ancillary, and of course the word that I can't pronounce, but a word such as like ancillary storage of goods associated with commercial activities, so it's not the primary use of a business? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
but Phil, a work vehicle that is also stops at Stop and Shop on the way home is not always perceived as being just a work vehicle. Many people have used their private vehicles as part of their work and doesn't necessarily make it a business.
No, but they also use business vehicles for private stuff sometimes.
I wouldn't think a parking of a car would just be considered
All right.
storage. though.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, but that's an example, but I mean,
So just to go back to Anna's question about intent, the intent is to acknowledge that oftentimes there is a storage component of commercial activity businesses. So businesses not only entail goods being sold, exchange of goods, etc., services, but also the storage that's associated with that.
Well, then I suggest you change the wording to "and may include."
Okay.
That way, the storage is linked to all the other things.
I think that's a really great way to make it very clear.
Yeah, we don't mean, there are people in town who have great big warehouses full of goods that they're selling elsewhere. That's a different kettle of fish altogether.
Great. So with that, then we'll skip over cabin unless anyone wanted to make any points around that definition.
Janelle, can I go back? One,
Sure.
Sorry to do this, but
No, it's okay.
in buildable area, didn't we not want to have that the description called a rectangular area?
That would require a zoning amendment, Bruce, so we can't we can't do that now.
Got it.
No, but just,
No,
Madam Chair, for
It
clarity,
wasn't.
everything that we're doing is a zoning amendment, so it's my understanding it's not the avoidance of zoning amendments, but the thought was not to make substantive changes.
Oh, wait, yeah, no, I'm confused. I apologize, everybody. We had talked about eliminating the concept of a rectangular area,
Right.
but I understand that we have to have public involvement and public hearings in what we're doing now. But as I think we all recognize that some changes are big enough to require a standalone hearing. I don't know whether changing the requirement that it be a rectangle is big enough, especially considering that in the old days, i.e. even in the 1985 regs, there was no mention of a necessary rectangle.
Yeah, I think it would be a simple thing to take it out and just put a area of a lot that contains no wetlands, wet bodies, instead of describing the shape of it.
I'm gonna
That
ask what
was,
James thinks.
Yeah, sorry, that was a large item of discussion when they put it in, because otherwise you could just follow a contour line, and they actually wanted a buildable area to have some component to it, both, width and length, if you will, to actually put a building. So I think that would, personally, I think that warrants a much larger discussion than just going through and doing, I think that's a very substantive change.
Yeah.
If you actually look at making a buildable lot, is probably the critical point of what planning and zoning does. So personally, I think that would be something that we shouldn't just try to not do without a lot of thought.
Any other thoughts about that, Phil?
No, but I do
I
remember.
agree with that.
Yeah, I think there's a some kind of a piece in this zoning regulation that kind of describes setbacks. And of course, you can, that would more or less require that the lot was somewhat rectangular and not this long sliver or something like that. So maybe that's right. Although a long sliver could be considered a rectangle, but
Yeah. My sense is we should leave that one alone, and I'm sorry,
For now,
But
I misled you
so
all.
I think there are, so we took something out, is that correct? That should be replaced in here, is that?
No,
no, it's
No.
there.
No,
Is
it's.
it?
so
Bruce
that's-
was wanting to remove rectangle. We had that discussion. It's on my list of things that we're gonna look at again. One of these days, I'm gonna put it in our zoning amendment folder, so you can all add to it.
Yeah, just for clarity, just to go back to, so buildable area is verbatim from page 84 of the current regulations.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
And if we're ready to jump back to camping unit rather, the same thing. So verbatim from page 84. Also travel trailer, camper, or RV.
Fine, excellent.
Same with certificate of occupancy.
Page 79. It's so helpful that you've included those pages, Janelle. Thank you.
You're welcome. But now I'm sorry.
Can I just jump back to camping unit, small house, a small house on wheels?
It's on wheels, it's a trailer.
Yeah. I'd consider it a camping unit, travel trailer, camper, RV, if it's on wheels.
So if somebody wants to bring a small house on wheels and call it a house,
Then it would be a mobile home, Karen.
It'd be a travel trailer probably
Yeah.
still.
But does the intent count? Is it intended for permanent use?
that's the
Mobile
I think
question.
that'd be a, I think that would be a discussion when it comes around.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
gonna-
and that would likely trigger Torrington Area Health to look through
Right.
sanitation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
temporary versus permanent implies that they require a source of water and a source of sewage disposal.
And connection maybe to the power
Yeah,
line.
yeah, so a small house on wheels that's going to be used for more, we don't know the amount of time, but we're gonna have to figure out the difference between temporary and permanent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That'll be a toughie. I don't,
Yeah.
let's go there later.
Okay, so
it might be sooner.
It might be. So certificate of zoning compliance is verbatim from the existing regulations. I was remiss in adding that page number. I do believe it's page 79 as well. And then we get in commercial activity just to go hand in hand with.
Could I interrupt with something that actually Bruce mentioned to me earlier? What happened to club?
Oh, my
We had
goodness.
club in the old regulations.
Well, why don't we look at putting it back in then? Should
Yeah.
we want to? So club verbatim, thank you for bringing that up. Club verbatim we can put in.
Yeah, we have clubs in town.
Great, so let's do that. Perfect, right after certificate.
What are you doing?
I'll make a note here. Okay, then we get to commercial activity.
Janelle, is there ever a reason to put, after certificate of occupancy, is that you have to have a certificate of zoning compliance before you get your CO?
Actually, I was gonna ask the same thing. In one of those, should it say a certificate of zoning compliance is required before a certificate of occupancy can be issued, or something along those lines?
I think that's more of a regulation type thing than a definition. isn't it?
Definition.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I'll make note. I'm glad all of these discussions just prompt me to make notes for other sections. I think that's a really good point to include that in administration and enforcement more towards the end of the document.
Okay,
Great, but thank you for that point. And we'll cite the statute on that too. Okay, so are we ready for commercial activity?
Yeah.
Okay, and then commercial kennel, this is blue because this is from statutes. I do need to reference what section this comes from. This has been added because commercial kennel gets mentioned as a use within permissible use chapter.
That makes perfect sense.
Okay.
Janelle?
Yeah,
But commercial activity, that's new to this, right? This
correct. So
description.
that came in, we're introducing business, we're introducing commercial activity.
Okay, so it says the buying and selling of commodities, activities, and or services. Does activities need a little more description? What does that mean, activities?
A
Business activity?
A hayride.
A fitness class,
So should it say business activity or some other?
Well,
No,
No,
I mean.
The activity or buying the activity, it is
Yeah, the
then a
buying or
business
selling.
transaction. Yeah.
you want us to clarify by saying recreational activity?
No,
Well,
it might be other.
It might not be recreational.
yeah, so it was intentionally broad for that very purpose.
Oh, well, an activity could include a music lesson, a court.
Yep.
Right.
It could be
The,
hiking on a trail or camping out, or, I mean, a lot of things, so
If you're paying for it.
If you're paying for it.
Right.
buying and selling, okay, of activities, okay.
It's,
Yeah.
it's just a definition. It's our definition of what we think a commercial activity is. And it's pretty broad. So a lot of things will fit under that.
Right.
Seems fair.
I guess the buying and selling actually, gives it some cover.
Well, that's the commercial part, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
The rest
But
of it's
it
just
might be-
activity.
it's broad because there might be something else that we just can't think of right now that might fall under commercial activity.
Right,
Right.
right. Good point.
I think it's
Moving
good.
on, common access way.
Okay, so common access way. Also shared driveway.
fine. It's from page 49.
Great.
46.
46. Development is just a new introduction of a definition.
I like it.
Okay.
Anybody else have any comments?
Covers everything.
Yeah.
And then looking ahead, disturbed area, I left it in black. And I'm just trying to see if it did exist.
No, it didn't.
No, it didn't. So I shouldn't have left that in black. This should actually be in green.
That's another very vague term, and it's nice to have it defined.
Yeah, this, and then we get into dwelling unit too.
So just to throw this out there,
Yeah.
that on page 30 and 7.7, 2, there is disturbed area means an area where the ground cover is destroyed or removed, leaving land subject to accelerated erosion.
Great. I thank you for that. I knew it was in black for a reason, and I didn't reference the page number. So Phil,
Page
you're
30.
great,
Page
perfect.
30.
Yeah, there were other areas of the regulations that helped me on a few of
Yep.
these.
It's certification, disturbed area, erosion, inspection, and sediment are all on that page.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I knew that had,
And then soil erosion and sediment control plan is on the next page.
great, awesome.
Good work.
I must not have liked
Phil, thank you.
referencing page 30.
This is why I have multiple monitors, so I can have two things up at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
I wish I did.
Thank you, Phil.
I just print everything that you put out in
I know.
color. It's expensive.
So then we get into dwelling unit. I often will reference planning dictionaries for these sorts of definitions because they are a little bit trickier.
The new statute also defines dwelling unit somewhere in it. So it's a good idea. It's the word that's being used all the time now, RDUs, residential dwelling unit.
So is the dwelling unit, so a multiple people living in a home that was divided in half, that would not be considered a dwelling unit because there's more than one person?
No,
Mhm.
So it says by here, or intended for occupants by one household on a long-term basis.
Oh. We can say one or more households, since eventually
that's a
we're going to
good
be
point.
addressing multifamily housing.
Well, then it wouldn't be a single dwelling unit though, right?
Yeah.
It'd be multiple dwelling units.
There's a good point.
If it
Yeah.
was a single house, it would be multiple dwelling units?
If there were multiple,
It'd
If it's,
be called multifamily housing. Or
Yeah.
Yeah, so then should we call this a single-
multifamily dwelling unit?
so then should this say single dwelling unit?
Or should this say dwelling units with S
And-
in apostrophes and then leave by one or more in apostrophes? So one could understand that a dwelling unit can be singular or dwelling units can be plural.
That seems logical.
Okay, that sounds great.
I'm not sure if our regulations actually allow that right now, but I think they will in the future, right?
Yeah.
Possibly.
Yeah,
think it-
Our regulations used to, our original zoning regulations included multifamily housing.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
haven't
but
figured
I
out
think
yet
from
where
a-
it disappeared, but I'll tell you.
from
So-
a definition standpoint though, I think a dwelling unit ought to just focus on one dwelling unit. And if there's multiple dwelling, that way we can differentiate between a singular or multiple. We can still use the same term for. In other words, if you
Yeah.
have a multifamily housing, then it's actually a multi-dwelling unit, and then it might make our regulations easier in the future.
There might, and there also might be some differences that are gonna apply for a multifamily dwelling unit as opposed to a single family dwelling unit. Like just, I don't know, other conditions that we might apply to so maybe you should have two definitions, one for,
I think I agree with Steve that we should have a single single.
It's just a definition, so define a single-family dwelling unit and then define a multi.
I mean, if it was an apartment complex, you wouldn't call the whole complex one dwelling unit.
No,
Exactly.
but you would say, potentially, you would say there are 7 dwelling units within that apartment complex. And then all of the units would be a standard measure of the dwelling unit. So a dwelling unit can exist in a single family home, and a dwelling unit can also exist in a multifamily apartment or a duplex.
I
So-
see.
But it's
It's one of
still
those-
2
so it's
dwelling
one of
units in a duplex, and it'd be 7 dwelling units in a 7-unit apartment. You wouldn't call the 7-unit apartment one dwelling unit. You would call it 7 dwelling units.
No,
Happens to
you
be.
wouldn't. So I think what we're all, and I probably led you astray because some of them are called RDUs, residential dwelling units, but a dwelling unit is not the same as a residence. When we think of residence, we think of one household.
So I think
Yeah,
a
the more we-
duplex would still have 2 dwelling units in it.
Right.
Correct. And to
in which
But we
case-
would not call it a residence.
And to constitute a dwelling unit based upon standards, living standards, it pursuant to definitions does need to include those components. So sleeping, eating, cooking, sanitation facilities to
Right.
constitute a dwelling unit. Whether it's a single family home, a dwelling unit within a multifamily home, or a dwelling unit within a duplex, it's a very standardized definition for all of those of what constitutes a place where a being can live.
So
Yeah,
this definition works perfectly, right?
it does.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think if
Okay.
we
It's-
focus instead on the 3 words independent housekeeping unit, that helps.
No,
us.
I think it's perfect the way she's got it really, because
Yeah.
it just says that if you're gonna have a multifamily building or a multi-dwelling unit building, each dwelling unit must be able to facilitate sanitation, eating, sleeping, and all those conditions. I can't say this closet is where one guy lives with no kitchen, and no bathroom. I have to have that for him.
Yeah.
So I
Right.
think it's perfect now that we sort of understand it.
I would look at it as a unit of measure for housing.
Right.
So rather, inches to feet, dwelling unit to housing.
I think we all agree that it's good.
Okay, then we get into excavation coming from page 30. And then we get into generator, which is new and just due to the fact that they are addressed in land use and by this commission. And also the zoning agent.
So would this also
it-
cover solar panels and windmills?
I'm sorry, can we
Well-
back up just a sec to excavation?
Yeah.
I'm just getting stuck on removal from the earth's surface of soil.
Okay,
Should we just say removal of soil, loam, sand, gravel, clay, rock, topsoil, or any other earth material?
I like that approach, because you're right, it might not be, it might not be very
It just seems a
technical,
little
it might
funny.
not be from the earth's surface. You might, yeah,
Thanks.
so we'll get rid of that. So generator. I heard a few comments.
So the question was, does this include solar panels and windmills and things of that sort?
No, generator is a generator. Solar panels are structures, but the question has come up, is a generator a structure? This defines what a generator is. Solar panels are already, ground mounted solar panels are structures. They're attached to
Well,
it.
This does by definition,
Yeah.
definition, it
I
does
see that
include
point.
solar panels
Yeah,
We need to tweak
And
something.
windmills
and
Yes.
water mills.
and water mills,
And what
Right.
are,
Compared to
ground mounted device.
what you might think.
Oh, there's all. kinds of
Weirdly
stuff
enough,
out
if
there.
what if it's like
Yeah.
wall mounted though?
Yeah,
And
that's
you could.
that's a really good point. Do,
It's still all, did you say if it's pole mounted, is that what you mentioned? It's still
wall
considered
mounted.
Wall mounted,
Like an air conditioner.
that would be similar to a roof, so those aren't structures.
Right.
Janelle, just as a totally off the side, but you
No, it's
don't
great.
mean in the care of an emergency, do you? You mean in case of emergency?
Thank you for that. Yes, I appreciate that a lot.
So maybe what we can do is say, narrow this down by saying a fuel-driven device.
Well, I don't know. Leave
No,
it broad. A water mill, a windmill.
Do you want me to star this definition and do more digging and then come back to you with some other proposals? Because I
Good
do want,
idea.
okay, let's,
And a windmill, frankly, is different than a wind turbine.
so why don't I'll
Yeah,
consult.
it's still a structure.
I just have a quick question about this in terms of if we're defining a generator, do we want a specific definition for what we all know as your classic like propane or gas fired generator? Would that be
Right.
helpful to have as a definition for our regulations and for Karen? Because then we should have a separate definition for that device, which can be noisy, et cetera, that we want to keep
Right.
separate from, say, somebody's solar system, or if wind is around the corner, et cetera. So I'm just wondering if that's helpful from Karen's perspective. Do we want a definition for a propane or gasoline, some fuel
Or-
fired generator?
Or a combustion engine generator?
Yeah.
Well,
Something
Janelle
that's-
may have been thinking of a propane or a gasoline run generator.
But then we have to get rid of converting one form of energy to
Yeah,
another.
let's just
Yeah.
I think Janelle understands our problem, so
Okay.
let's let her solve it for our next meeting.
Well,
A question I do have for the commission, because we mentioned, I do believe as a part of dimensional standards, generators come into play. Do we in fact wish to define it?
The dimensional standards?
No, do we, so,
Yes, Janelle, we
Yes.
do,
Okay,
because
yes, we do.
many
One-
enforcement issues related to permanent generators.
fantastic, okay. And should we look at it to define it in the permanent sense? Yes.
Yes,
Okay, so generator is something I'm tagging to be further discussed once I do a little bit more research.
Mhm.
And then moving on, family daycare home, that's
I'm s-
verbatim from state statute.
Can I ask a silly question about generators?
Yes.
Would that be like, we're talking about like a gas powered generator? Is that a structure? Is that considered a structure?
It is, yes.
Okay.
Because that
Should
has been a
we-
huge, that has been a huge issue, and some other towns have far more stringent issues, but we've had too many generators in setbacks that are a nuisance to the neighbor as opposed to the person who has it in the setback, so they don't hear it or see it.
Mhm.
That's what
Moving
this is all
forward.
about.
But we
Yeah.
may want to include generator in the structure definition then.
Yeah, well, that's
A
what.
gas generator.
Yeah, well, I'm already including it as a structure because it is a generator that requires wiring. And in many cases, approval from Torrington Area Health that there's underground wiring going on. It is attached to the ground. You don't pick it up like a shopping
Yeah.
bag.
Yeah,
But back to the generators, you sort of have, if you want to, I think there should be a definition for a gas powered generator, because they come with issues as far as noise and bothering your neighbors.
Yeah.
As opposed to like a water mill. That
Well-
nobody might care if that's on the edge of the guy's property. But certainly we care if that generator's on the edge of the guy's property, the gas powered generator.
A water mill is a different term. To me, a generator.
Well, it
as a
doesn't matter what
zoning
it is.
enforcement
It
officer,
doesn't,
it's a generator, it has,
it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what it means personally to you or me. It matters what we put down as a definition. So,
it
exactly.
has
I
to,
just-
it has to make sense, Steve.
yeah, so I'm just saying you should probably use a combustion engine and get
Right.
rid of the transfer of energy.
Yeah, great.
'Cause,
That's
you know, we
helpful.
might not care if solar panels are not within the guy's setback. I'm just using that as an example.
Well, unfortunately, they
certainly-
do.
We certainly
Solar-
care that
Sure.
the combustion engine is not in the setback.
That's helpful. That's
Well,
really helpful.
We'll cover that when we get to structure, won't we?
Yeah.
Um,
it
Got a little
will be-
ways to go.
if we get there. Moving along. Farm.
Farm, so this ties back to the agriculture definition, which is from state statute.
Yeah.
Then flag lot comes from page 80.
Yeah.
Great, and then we get into floating zone. This is just for clarification purposes. I think sometimes overlay zones and zoning districts can get confusing. So this is an attempt to help clarify floating zones, such as like a flood hazard overlay zone, or rather the better example is the planned conservation development zone. So it isn't actually fixed on the map within town, but should an applicant come forward with a proposal and wish to apply it to a particular tract of land, multiple properties, that's what a floating zone is. The only one in the regulations as written is the planned conservation zone.
Yeah, they're a
this would
very
co-
useful zoning tool, and it's good to have it defined.
Right. And this will cover all the overlays, even new ones in the future.
You
No,
know,
an overlay is
actually,
different.
No,
yeah, Bruce, I did misspeak. So we'll have a different definition for overlay zones because they are indeed different.
Oh,
Yeah.
the
so-
floating zone, overlay zone is geographically fixed.
Yeah, it's the last sentence of floating zone.
Janelle, can you tell me what the difference is?
Yeah, so just off the top of my head, so an overlay zone is a zone that is overlaid over an existing zone. And a good example would be the flood hazard overlay zone. So let's just say a property can be in R1 and the flood hazard overlay zone. And should it have the overlay zone on the property, there might be some more stringent regulations.
Okay.
Oftentimes, they are put into regulations for environmental concerns. Aquifer protection areas are overlay zones. The Housatonic River overlay zone is another good example for the town.
And what's a floating zone then?
So a floating zone, a good example specific to Cornwall would be the planned conservation zone.
1 second, James is stuck in the waiting room.
Oh, thanks so much. I appreciate that. Where was I? So the planned conservation zone is not fixed to the zoning map. So if you recall the zoning map from, sorry to make everybody dizzy, but from our section here, my mouse is being problematic. So my mouse does not want to do this right now.
Well,
Okay.
a floating zone is once someone finds just the right kind of land that they want to use for a project, and we have allowed that use, that special kind of use. We create the zone for the use. That I haven't helped at all. Never mind.
No.
In the past couple of years, when Tom McGowan was here, the PDD, Plan Development Zone, that is kind of unique to Morris, called Winvian, which was a PDD. There's uses of, I think in New Hartford, we called it something different than a floating zone because it was right across from the school at one point. But every town has but Janelle putting in the fact that this is something that has been discussed in terms of providing some unique uses in the town contingent on many conditions and qualifications. Is putting a definition in that is a term that probably, once you get past some of the other things, would be something that you might want to think about. And I think Janelle could give a lot of direction on, because Janelle's been in a lot of towns that have floating zones, but are just named something else. Right, Janelle?
Yeah, Yeah.
I think for Bruce's, it's probably still unclear.
I'm totally
So,
unclear.
I
but let's
I
work
was-
on that separately after the meeting, Bruce.
Okay.
And I can have an exchange of ideas with Janelle's help, okay?
Sure, I brought up the map just to further explain it, but I am happy to do it at a different time.
Maybe I'll call you, Janelle.
You're welcome to.
Okay.
Well, I'd like to include, I don't think that this is probably a concept that Will is unfamiliar with too. So I'd like something in writing that we could share with everyone. How's
Sure,
that,
just-
Janelle? Would you do that?
If you search for
Absolutely.
floating zone on Google, there's some good stuff about it.
Yeah. So, and
Oh, that's probably
and-
something we could do is just look on Google. Good idea, Phil.
but what I can do is just draw up a really quick overview specific to Cornwall.
Cool.
Too. Yeah. So flood hazard area, this is tied to statutes, a very official definition. It does come into play because there are some zones that are within flood hazard areas. And then
Yeah.
grading gets defined.
Very good.
Okay.
What's grubbing? Any
I'm-
excavation,
Grubbing,
rubbing?
filling.
I
Grubbing-
am,
Grubbing is the use of an excavator to be able to pull out the root system that's on the top surface of any specific area.
Oh,
Yeah.
who knew?
I know.
yeah, hence how it can lead to a lot of erosion.
Right.
Mhm.
For instance, tree clearing is when somebody says that there's, forestry activities going on, if trees are just cut, for instance, the creation of some sorts of habitat for rabitat, I want to say, I think it's rabitat, where vegetation and trees are cut to a certain level but not grubbed. It
Right.
provides stability and can create habitat, but anything that's grubbed, especially on slopes near lakes and whatever, becomes an environmental nightmare.
Yep.
Right, because just cutting things, the root systems are still alive of all the plants and they resprout.
Yeah, there used to be state money for leaving the low-lying stuff, the bunny money.
Yeah. Wildlife habitat improvement projects, WIPs,
Yeah.
WIP grants, yeah.
For the rabbits.
Yep.
Then we get into group home. This is a statutory definition as well. And this makes its way through state law into our local regulations. Then both hazardous materials, health official, verbatim from page 81.
Okay,
And then impervious surface.
You
Gets
skipped health
defined.
official. Oh, no, you said health official. Never mind, sorry.
Can we go back, stay on hazardous materials?
Mhm.
So in the original description of hazardous materials, it cites Connecticut state statutes, regulations of the Connecticut state agency shall be deemed a hazardous material for the purpose. So it all is backed by these comments about the state. And you've taken all that out of that on this description. Is it important to keep that in, Janelle?
You
To
know-
pass the responsibility onto the state instead of us?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So because as you can see where that definition exists now, it does get rather lengthy. Why don't I get the Connecticut general statutes that are referenced and reference them here rather than get
Perfect.
into those bullet points? Does that make better sense?
Absolutely. Perfect.
Okay,
Yep.
so I'll just make note to do that. I'm really, I made note to bring that up. I really want to simplify things, but by simplify things, I don't want to lose sight of clarity and of the sources that we're citing. So we'll pull the statute.
find Bruce.
We'll pull the statute back in there.
Great.
Great. And then we get into impervious surface yep.
Very clear cut. It's a word that people are using more and more now.
Here's a
Yeah.
question I have that I that I've actually run into as well. This includes the term road. Does it mean a gravel road?
From my understanding, yes, because of the way that water will still run off of gravel, it's not going to be leaching into the ground the same way that it would as grass, for example, or
Because
undisturbed
everything else,
land.
everything else is, solid materials. And a road can be asphalted, but in many cases, it's gravel. But that, I don't know whether that's included. I guess it is. I guess this is quoted from the Connecticut aquifer protection areas.
Yeah,
Yes.
I
It's
think,
a very good question.
I think that, even some old woods roads, if you look at them, they're not that, I suppose water does penetrate them eventually, but not really. It just
I
sort
would
of,
agree with you.
it turns to mud maybe, but that's still on the surface.
When I first moved to Cornwall, a long time ago, there was an unwritten code in Cornwall Plains that one does not pave one's driveway. One has gravel. And I have lived with this idea that gravel is preferred ever since. So are you guys telling me that gravel is not an impervious surface?
Not as much as a forest or a grassland. More than a road, more than an asphalt or concrete, but not as much as a forest, like Janelle said, or grassland.
There's
But
that-
No matter where you draw the line.
for the calculation of it, is there any point in which you have to calculate the total impervious surface of your property? I think there
Right.
is.
Yeah,
That's right.
it's in our bill.
Does a
Yeah,
does a
in our-
gravel driveway
Right.
count towards that? And my understanding is generally that it does not.
Well, it depends upon what town you're in.
Yeah, it depends upon the town and it depends upon the surface, because I've seen engineers refer to it as semi-permeable
There you
gravel.
are.
Right.
That's probably more accurate.
Yeah.
And who knows how
We
to
actually
define
need-
semi-permeable.
We should defer to Keith. I bet he might know.
Eh.
Good one.
The porous paving parking lot in Torrington across from the police station is an LID structure. And it addresses impervious surface because that's a permeable pavement because of the pavers and the levels of material underneath. So there's all sorts of new things coming through with LID. The interesting piece that we all don't address is that we all think that grass is the end all and be all, but if you have a grassed lawn of certain kinds of grass, it is not as pervious as other forms of vegetated cover.
We actually did a permeable asphalt driveway. There's asphalt that allows water to pass through it. over-
Yeah.
And is it,
She puts the word like, a roof, road, sidewalk. She doesn't define a roof, road, sidewalks, or paved parking lots. She just says, as an example, she uses the word like. So I think it could be a little on the vague side, which could work. If somebody does build a
Yeah.
driveway that's that is not impervious, they might not fall under that.
Yeah, and to Steve's point, should it come down to it and an applicant has to come before the commission with a plan that shows what's impervious and what is not. And if they wish to make the argument that their gravel driveway is not, there'll be that opportunity to hear them and listen to what evidence they have.
Mhm.
I like
That's
that
a
idea.
very valid point, Janelle. Yes.
Thought so.
Okay.
cool, junkyard.
Junkyard, that's verbatim from page 81. And then light industrial was not defined within definitions, but it was defined on page 71 of the current regulations.
Mhm.
And then livable floor area.
You said you were updating page 82, which I suppose means that you removed the idea of headroom,
Yeah,
which during my time on the commission did come up during one discussion concerning an application. So I'd like to understand why you took it out.
So let's go to the livable, so the current as written regulations, just for everyone, so it does read, the gross horizontal area of the floor of a dwelling unit that has a structural headroom of 6 feet 6 inches or more is provided with heat and is suitable for year-round occupancy. To
So
this.
some of that comes from building code
Code.
and
Yeah.
what is defined as livable space. So generally anything, I'm 6'6" is strange.
So-
Normally
Yeah,
6'8".
And I
Um,
do believe that's been updated within the International Building Code
And
from
I,
what it reads.
I think part of the reason the height is in there, not so you can build short roof ceilings, it's because of when you have a sloped roof that interferes like with the upstairs of the building, if you have a knee wall. They
Exactly.
don't count the part from 6 feet 6 inches over to the side that's shorter than that.
Oh.
Exactly. And so when you're looking at
I'm looking at one right now in front of me.
um, whatever
Well, we're
else.
looking at the ice skating rink.
All right, so
Well,
it's,
then why don't we
not ice
just,
skating.
instead of putting the numbers in their reference with headroom as defined by the building code?
Yeah.
So go back to as written.
Oh,
Gross
no, I think this is much better, what you've done.
Okay.
No, I like what you have better.
Okay,
I just wanted to understand maybe where the original headroom idea came from, but now Christine has explained that it was part of a building code. But if the building code changes from time to time, we're gonna have to reference it.
Well, it's also, do we have, I mean, from a building code standpoint, they have a minimum square footage for bathrooms, et cetera, or something that they want to work with. And are we throwing this off by having a different definition? Somebody goes to their tax card and it shows.
yeah, James, why don't I do more research and just align this with building code as best I can?
It can
Okay.
also be an assessor's issue, as I sit in a 220-year-old house that the assessor says that the third floor is a bedroom and I can walk through the center of it, but I'm 5 foot.
Well, and
Most of the rest of you would have to do this to get through, and it's defined, I pay for a 3-bedroom house. It's not a 3-bedroom, it's the knee walls. I mean, it's very petite, but that can be, it's a lot of interpretations, assessors, building code, et cetera, that can cause confusion. So we might want to look into it because it can be used properly or can be used improperly.
Well, it's
Yeah.
also when we talk about accessory apartments or something like that, and they have to be a
Yes.
certain percentage of the main house.
I think that
think
was the case that we were talking about, an accessory apartment and exactly what its measurements were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was an antique house, yes. With
So-
with no headroom in the better part of the upstairs.
why don't I flag and star this, and much like generator, do more research and then bring back some alternatives.
Great.
Okay, so we'll have a fuller understanding of what we're getting ourselves into. And next we get to lot. So this has also been updated from what was, what the current regulations say.
So Janelle, I don't understand this at all. So what it says is one or more contiguous parcels of land. But the old description said exactly the opposite. A lot defined as a parcel of land which is either owned separately from any contiguous parcel as evidenced by the conveyance record. So aren't you saying exactly the opposite of that?
So they're very different, actually. I wouldn't consider it an opposite per se, because this is just discussing contiguous parcels could be under the same ownership if they conform with the applicable building regulations. Then it's because of the merger provision within zoning. So that's where if there's one or more contiguous parcels, it's sort of an automatic merger pursuant to statute.
You mean they
Oh.
become one lot?
Yeah.
Can you say that
Sure.
again, Janelle? I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, so, and
Oh, it's a
I'm-
huge issue.
yes,
Yeah.
and Karen, help me out if you have direct sort of experience in the town of Cornwall with this.
No,
But it's,
I've had it in another town, not.
yes,
Yeah.
so it's more so in the example that lots are contiguous under single ownership. Unless very clearly stated otherwise, the merger provision comes into play, especially if there's a nonconformity involved.
Yes.
What's the
But
merger?
hang on, when you say the merger provision, that just means that you can do a lot line adjustment and create one lot when there was previously two lots.
No, it
It's-
means that,
it's
it means that
assumed.
the assessor can merge your parcels without asking.
It's assumed.
Wait. You can mean the assessor can what?
Merge
Sorry,
your
I'm having trouble.
parcels and make them one without your permission.
But what if
But
you
it-
want to sell one?
Yeah,
Right?
if you have
Right.
two building lots, then they
Yeah,
can't
can
do
you
that.
also subdivide without permission?
Well, yeah, so should the contiguous lots be non-conforming? That's more so my understanding is if there's a non-conformity that exists, that's when the merger provision becomes applicable. And that's due to the single ownership of this continuous tract.
Where is the merger provision found?
I can grab that. Why don't I bring that before everyone?
Is it a state
That's a state
statute?
thing?
It's been, I think it was originated in case law that then trickled down to statute.
But I have just from your definition itself, you say lot, plot, or parcel. And then you're saying one or more contiguous parcels. So you're not going to define a parcel with one or more contiguous parcels. I think it would be clearer
Good point, James.
to have each lot is its own lot. If somebody decides to make them two separate non-conforming lots, a single lot, before they do the merger, there's still two separate lots. And I think by definition, you should still think of a lot as a lot, and that's how their tax card represents that, all their, all the data, the town maps, et cetera, all are pointing to individual lots, even though the same person might own 5 of them contiguously. Does that make sense? Someone could choose. I didn't freeze again, did I?
No, you're there.
We're listening
My monologue
intently.
again. Last time I froze with the monologue, so it doesn't stop there. You guys know what I'm saying. Yeah, sorry.
No,
I think it's
James,
long-winded.
so just to your point, and as I'm thinking this really through of the true implications of any change, it takes me back to the whole rectangular discussion. I really think just going back to as the definitions written verbatim might be truly the best thing at this juncture.
Great.
So you
Yeah.
like the way it's written then? You think it works?
I mean,
The way it was written.
yeah, it is a little clunky, but I don't think to change, just like changing it, much like touching that rectangular piece, I think it might just be better off at this point for the purposes of the reorganization and clarity, our exercise in front of us to really keep it as it's written. If everyone on the commission thinks
Yeah.
so.
Yep,
I
agree.
have an aside, which is that it's no accident that most of our state and federal legislators are lawyers who are trained. What happens to a town with a zoning commission that doesn't have an outstanding land use consultant who knows the laws?
So
It's not, I just want to whine for a minute here, Phil. It's not fair to us that we're supposed to know all this stuff.
Anna, we're going to know
That's fine.
everything when we're done with this.
I think so.
but back to work. In the current regulations, the last sentence of it says, a group of public, institutional, commercial, or industrial buildings under the same ownership may be considered as occupying the same lot. Is
Yeah,
that,
Yeah, and the choice of the word may is instrumental there,
okay,
because it's the option of may, it doesn't mean shall. So that might, but not always.
okay, all right. I guess that doesn't change, okay. Yeah. no,
I'm just thinking at the time that this definition was written, there was a very particular parcel that one had in mind.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, definitely had. And I hate to use the word agenda, but there was something intent. But I'm so, I'm so glad you brought up the whole concept of merger, because that is something that really needs to be understood, that those things that there are some weird things in case law and in statute that can cause some interesting things, that you would never think could happen, but they're supported by
all right, so I'm going to start a second list. My first list is of regulatory changes that we need to discuss, and my second list is things we need to learn about.
Yeah. Good
So-
point. So Anna, on that, to your second list, the things we need to learn about, in between meetings, just writing up little blurbs and citing where I'm getting information. I have a lot of Connecticut municipal land use law books, and then also some case law books. I'd be happy to just do that research, send an email saying where I got my examples from, so that everyone can read and familiarize themselves with some of the things that we're discussing.
That's fabulous.
Great. Okay, so in the words of Phil, back to work. So lot width, frontage, that, just so I am clear, I don't believe gets discussed in the definitions. Yes, it does get discussed in the definition section. So
Yeah,
this
it's called frontage.
yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And that, as written, just says the lot line separating the lot from a street, and this just,
It's more specific.
yeah.
Well, this combines both lot line front and lot width
Mhm.
in a much clearer way.
Okay,
I mean, I
Okay.
think it's,
Great,
great.
thank you.
So then we get into low impact development. It's referenced in the regulations as something that needs to be implemented, but it doesn't get defined. So that's where it does get defined, and it gets defined just in a very broad way. So someone would, in general, understand what lit is.
Can I just ask one favor, though? It is defined in the wetlands regulations, because the definition from LID was created by actually an LID grant that came out of the DEEP. Could I get you the definition that Darcy Winther gave us to put into our wetlands regulations, so we could have maybe the same
Yeah, that'd be good.
language?
Yeah, I appreciate that harmony amongst town documents, absolutely.
Okay.
So I'll circle this one too. And then
That's a beautiful phrase, harmony among town documents. I like.
then we get into mixed. Oh,
I had
I'm
a
sorry.
quick question, and maybe this was when I was frozen out. Did we define flag lot? Did I miss that?
Yeah, so we did, and that was just taken verbatim from page 80.
Great. I was just curious then, how do we, and it was for my own, I forget, lot width with a flag lot? Is there, how are
Well,
we
she uses
interpreting?
She uses both words in her definition. Go to your, just move up here
I
above
see
farming.
flag, lot which has
Or
less than the
after
minimum
farming is flag
of
lot.
street, and which is accessed by common access way.
so,
Okay,
so what's the lot, what's the lot width when you have a flag lot?
that was my question.
It's less than, the
It's less than the required lot width. It would be specific to that lot.
So it might be 50 feet or whatever.
It could be, yeah, could be very small.
Okay.
Okay. So back to where we were, mixed use development. This comes from our recent legislation, Public Act 2129. And again, just very general, very conceptual, just to bring the concept into the regulations. Non-conforming lot. This comes from page 72. And same goes with non-conforming structure.
I like how you added the phrase yet was already in existence, because that wasn't in the original definition. And it's clarifying
Yeah.
It's
for
not the same,
non-conforming lot.
yeah, it's not the same it's not the same
Oh, thanks
Was-
for that. Yeah, I
was
thought I
in
had,
prior to whatever it is. Should that phrase be the same? Was in existence prior to or on the effective date of these regulations?
Hmm.
Yeah, it would
Sorry.
probably be consistent with that.
yeah, let's do that. Why don't I make it more of what was written for that one? Does that make better sense? Okay. I mean, this doesn't come from the definition section. This is from, in the existing regulations, there's a section that stands alone on nonconformities.
Yeah, but it's good to have all the definitions, even if they're repeated
Mhm,
in the definition section.
perfect.
I want to move backwards just a bit, because I've noticed that you took out mobile home. There's a definition of mobile home in our current regs.
I appreciate all of these catches. I really think we should make sure it's in there. And
Mobile
there's
home and
a,
motel.
yeah.
But motel comes in, I found where it is
Yeah.
traditional lodging the definition of traditional lodging includes a motel. So she put it is in here.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're
and
almost there, folks. We're almost there.
And that was really intentional, because when we get to uses, a good exercise for all of us will be to look at all of our uses and make sure that we're defining them.
Yeah.
Great.
I mean, just with non-conforming lot,
Yep.
the last sentence of
Sorry.
non-conforming structure is basically the same thing we're trying to say about non-conforming lot, right?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. That was
So if we
Christine.
just repeat that,
Yep, that was
Yeah.
Christine's catch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then we get to non-conforming use. And again, page 72 is referenced.
right? The only thing, yeah, I guess these is fine. Yep.
And then parking space, I did update because the standards and the regulations as written are actually not the standards for a parking space. A parking space is actually 9 by 18 feet.
Who decides what size a parking space is?
That's in statute.
Okay.
That's Connecticut general. Is there something in Connecticut? Is there a reduced width parking space or like a compact parking space?
They
as
get
well?
into, and I'll bring this is another thing that I'll definitely share all these resources. They really get into handicapped aisles. There's a lot of it. I believe the impetus was around handicap parking and making sure that enough of it was provided and at the correct dimensions.
But this is good for like when you need to show on a site plan that you have, if you're creating a accessory apartment or home office, you have enough parking. And you have to have the minimum 9 by 18 parking spot for the required. That's good.
Great. Public utility installation.
Janelle, before you go on
Yeah.
that, there was
Yep.
In the old description, there was one called ordinary high water mark.
Yes, we will use that's a very particular definition to the Housatonic River overlay zone. So that
Right.
will be there along with the definition buffer zone, which is very particular to the Housatonic overlay.
Oh, thank you for clarifying that.
Yep, good.
Yeah, because the buffer zone, so there's also a very general term buffer in planning, but then there's the buffer zone, which is a very particular to the Housatonic River overlay regulations. So we'll revisit that when we get to all of our overlays.
Well, okay, when going back to the very beginning, you have a definition for buffer zone. And what we had in our old regulation is called a buffer strip.
Yes.
So maybe to distinguish between the Housatonic River overlay zone, buffer zone, and a
Mhm.
routine buffer strip, we should use the two words.
Okay. Yeah, especially with Housatonic, because those regulations are inserted within the Cornwall regulations, keeping those intact verbatim, other than they are repeated in different sections of the regulations that are effective today, but to really keep those intact in all of their substance is very just important, because we inherit that from that body. So we'll get to that when we get to the overlay zones.
Okay.
Okay, public utility installation, again, statutory, and what I need to do is pull the statutes that these come from, just so we have that when it comes time to cite them. And the same goes with re-subdivision.
I'm really happy for the re-subdivision definition. It took me a long time as a commissioner to really understand subdivisions and re-subdivisions.
Great. And this is used in here as a tool, just so commissioners and the zoning agent and just anyone who's curious can understand the difference between the first cut, a subdivision, re-subdivision. Then we get into sawmill permanent. And again, this is where our need to define permanent versus temporary comes in again, because we see that used as a term so often in our regulations, where we have sawmill permanent. And this was,
can we just ask you now to go ahead and work on a definition for those two things?
absolutely, that
As
will
long
be,
as the other commissioners agree with me that we need to try to get a definition.
Of permanent
Anybody
versus
disagree
temporary.
with that? Pardon?
Of permanent versus temporary.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, we should have it.
yeah, and just, I think of it in two ways, being permanent or temporary as far as time, and then being permanent or temporary in the sense of a structure.
Yeah.
So I can work on those two, and then I'll hand them off to Karen to really look at them from the lens of enforcement.
Okay.
Because I think the time piece, the temporary time piece, that's always a little bit of a tricky one.
Yeah.
Do you think it would be better to differentiate between commercial and non-commercial uses? As opposed-
By defining commercial use, commercial, as we saw earlier today, that's intended to help do that.
I think that there's other places that will end up using permanent and temporary than sawmills, that we should probably have the definition.
So permanent comes into play here with sawmill because of the way that it's used as a use in permissible uses.
And
Yeah, but
if
so
I
let's-
remember correctly, sawmill are included in the definition of agriculture.
Yes, they have an agricultural component. There's no doubt
But-
about it.
But just as far as the time, I might have something out for a long time and only use it very infrequently. So let's stick with the example of the sawmill. I might have a sawmill and it's never moved. It's sat where I unhitched it from the truck, even though it might have tires, it's never moved. It's been there for 5 years, let's say. So it's certainly permanent, but I use it so infrequently. Does it really count as permanent? It's not.
Good problem, yeah. Okay,
And
maybe
No, I
we
just,
don't want it, maybe we should just add this to the list of things to talk about.
Yeah,
A
well,
permanently
that's-
installed facility sawmill is a little bit different than something that's been parked behind a truck.
Certainly, that's why I think
So,
it's nice
I have
to
a-
leave it a little vague.
So I have a question though. How does this fall in line with our agriculture?
You
Right.
know, I want to, so, and this actually was the question, Phil, that I was just going to ask the commission. So my thinking behind defining this term was because it's a use. So sawmill, temporary sawmill is a use within the use chapter. And in thinking through defining uses, that's what triggered my thinking behind defining this use. We might not actually want to go there if we are then towing the line with defining something that's already inherent in the agricultural definition.
I think that's a really good thought.
And
Yes.
this is definitely one of those things, Janelle, that came from a case.
Yeah, and I think, so as we do this exercise, we're seeing when these moments are arising, and a lot of it is just how do we proceed, and just getting the, the understanding from the commission that might have an understanding of the history and the genesis of these terms, and then knowing when we're like, oh, we should maybe let that one go.
I would be willing to let that one go.
And I think,
The
speaking of letting
agriculture
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'll just finish. The agriculture definition defined by section 1.1 of the Connecticut General Statutes lists lumber as an agricultural commodity.
And yeah,
So let's
Fair
just
enough.
leave all the problem of temporary sawmills versus permanent, all of that for another
Yeah.
commission to struggle with.
I mean, we will certainly give this another go over when we're really looking closely at the uses and the use table.
Okay.
So, okay.
and having said that, I think we made a promise to someone that we were going to end this meeting at 8:30.
It's
They-
okay.
Oh,
Honestly,
no, it's 8:27. Thank you so much, Karen.
no, I mean, honestly,
Janelle,
Happy birthday.
thanks, guys.
It's
But
your
I
Toast
birthday.
to you. Happy
You didn't even
birthday.
get cake?
and who has their glasses? That's what
I did. I'm the only one, but it's empty.
If you guys all want to keep
Cheers.
working, I do think the chef is still working in the kitchen, so we can.
Can we finish this page?
No.
Okay.
No,
Wow.
8:30
We
is
agreed
8:30.
8:30.
Oh, he's
Done.
behind you now. He's coming
I
in.
don't think I can.
Yes.
Are
we ready? Are we
Can we get
ready?
back on,
I'm not singing, Karen. There's not a chance.
He has a voice. Happy birthday to you.
I think I have a little bit more time. I think there's still a little bit of work to be done. So let's get through definitions.
We're gonna take sawmill permanent out.
Correct. Excellent. Okay, so we get into setback, and that is updated from what was on page 82. It's an attempt certainly to clarify too.
Yeah,
Mhm. Great.
I like
And
it.
then steep slopes, again, statutory. I will bring where that comes from into this document so that we all know it's an official definition. Typically, it's at 25% at 2-foot contour intervals. So it's just standardized.
we've been, that definition has to be somewhere in our regs because we've been using it and talking about it forever.
Mhm. And I think it's in there. I think it's just slipped in there aside from the definitions.
Yes.
Yeah, and then stormwater, so again, playing into LID and the need for LID, and also tying into the impervious surface definition. Stormwater is definitely something that we consider more and more as we're dealing and approaching development.
Does this tie in with inland wetlands definition, Karen?
Not really, but I don't think it really needs to tie, stormwater doesn't really have to tie in, because number one, in our wetlands regulations, we also have the right to consider LID and all of those things as part of a permit. It's already written into definitions and part of the language for consideration of decision. Yeah. With clear, with pretty clear direction as to how to look at it. Yeah.
Well, but what about the whole concept of us using the same definitions across our regulations? And
Should we harmonize across town?
I'll check it out I will look closer at our wetlands regulations, because actually we're going to be making some changes to those as well.
Okay. All
So
right.
all right. The next definition is very important. Structure.
Structure. So this is cited where this is coming from. Again, Connecticut general statutes. It might take some heat away from the zoning agent in times of needing to discern whether or not something's a structure.
We might want to add generator to that,
That's a very good call.
because that's going to be a sticking point, I would imagine, Ken, or maybe a combustion generator, a gas or diesel.
Combustion and above ground propane tanks.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think,
1,000-gallon silver bullet sitting 5 feet from a property line that.
I have a question about, we have setbacks that we're defining structures need to be from the boundary lines, but then we're also defining structures as things that aren't necessarily required to be setbacks, like a sign or a fence.
We will get into that when we touch on the dimensional requirements.
yeah, but I think generator should be added to that, because that
Yeah.
would put that in as a structure that it does need to be within the setbacks, and it
But
does. need to
my
be within the-
generator sits on a wheeled cart and I move it in and out from the
You're good.
garage. during
That's
It's
the
in-
day.
permanent generator.
Yeah.
So make sure we use that word permanent generator.
Yeah, and then-
After
and
we
then-
define permanent.
Up to the ground, yeah.
Yeah, you define, you got a little work on, but on the generator part, it does clarify between a portable and a fixed.
Right.
Yes.
I don't have any problem clarifying between that myself, really.
So I think that should be added to the structure.
Great.
Well, affixed to the land, I mean,
True.
right.
That does, sorry, Phil, you're right.
Mhm.
Janelle,
Yep.
I have one question about this. You also include patios. So that's
Yeah, that's-
unusual.
I
that-
know that's a statute thing, and that I struggle with myself because I've never permitted a patio as a
No.
CEO, and I've never cared.
No, that's, you mean,
Is
that's
there-
actually, that's
Why don't we make this, why don't we adapt this, make it unique to Cornwall, get rid of patio,
yes.
add on,
May I add something about patios?
yeah.
Uh-oh.
Going back to what different town hall offices do, the word patio does come up in the assessor's office and sometimes coverage.
Do we want to define patio, first of all, but
So that's-
That's a good
But
point.
I would like to get a take that I heard recently from the assessor in terms of coverage of well, I'll I will go back and redefine what I heard, which was an interesting interpretation. I'm not sure how much it's often done in the town of Cornwall or if it's standard, but patio can be became kind of a troubling issue for me. So I will clarify and bring it back.
Okay,
Well,
great.
the only thing that-
I think we should agree to your suggestion that we remove the reference to the statute and for Cornwall purposes, remove patio, add permanent generator and above ground propane tanks.
here, here.
Excellent.
I would
Hold
also
on,
get
I would
rid of
like to say
sign,
how,
fence.
yeah, how I
Tennis
prefer
court.
to construct a patio though is, if given the choice, on a concrete slab. And then sometimes that concrete slab has footings, which
Oh,
would very much make it a permanent structure. So this is where I think the definition of patio as like a dry laid stone patio on a pervious surface might be different than a concrete slab patio.
Well, that's,
Right.
I agree, but
Christine, you're bringing up an interesting point, and that's what I'm going to ask about, because I found it was used on some coverage, and if you're looking at what a business, what percentage of a business is to the house, and all of a sudden the patio is part of the coverage of the house. I'm like, huh?
so
What?
Christine, maybe you can help me with this. I don't believe that patio not connected to the house by anything except a staircase is under the jurisdiction of the building inspector. Is that correct? I
If it
think
has
that's true.
footings, does it have footings?
No. Now, Christine's right. You could have a very elaborate terrace or patio that would have footings, but I would say by far that's generally not the issue.
If you had footings, wouldn't you also have soil disturbance?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, then it would qualify for a zoning permit on that basis, would it not?
not
Well,
necessarily.
these are just definitions,
Understood.
right? We're not,
Yes,
So-
so I think to Bruce's inquiry and Christine's earlier point, and based upon what research Karen does in the interim between meetings, it might be prudent to define patio. And then we can assess taking it potentially out of structure, but making sure that it's defined in a way so that it's very clear.
Well, because
Right.
we don't want somebody to like completely cover a huge chunk of their
Right.
lawn, half their property and say, this is my patio.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, so-
you'll start and we'll return to it.
Yeah, I've flagged structure, but again, very, very, very helpful discussion. And then we have a few more. So we have subdivision. Again, just going back to help one read and discern between a first cut, a subdivision, and a re-subdivision. And it then references the subdivision regulations. We get into temporary healthcare structures. This was a topic of Public Act 17-155, I want to say 2017, when
Yeah,
Granny,
and the town made the P and Z and the Board of Selectmen made a decision not to opt out of that legislation. So it does affect Cornwall.
yep, so Granny, I should put in parentheses here, granny pods.
Odds, yeah.
Because sometimes that's actually the vernacular for them, so I'll add that. And then,
The bottom line is we can't deny them.
yes, they're
You know,
treated, yeah.
I'm gonna have to ask you to go back to the division of land into 3 or more lots. Why is it not, why if somebody had a 2 acre lot and they wanted to subdivide it into 2 lots? Why is that
First
not?
cut, right?
So yeah, it may or may not trigger subdivision based upon if there's been any other earlier division of land.
Suppose that was a 5 acre lot that was divided into a 2 acre lot and a 3 acre lot. Would they then be able to subdivide it? Would they be able to divide it?
That would be the
as
third.
first cut?
That would be the third. No, it depends on whether it happened before January 4th, 1988. Right? If I'm reading that correctly.
Mhm.
Well,
Well,
it could be going to 2 lots would still because if it's not the first cut and you're re-subdividing
Right.
a
No, that would be
parcel
the
into
third.
2 lots,
That would be 3 then.
oh, you're counting the first one that happened back in.
If
whenever
it
that
happened
was
after
recorded.
1988, if it happened in 1990, then it would be 3 lots. If it happened prior to January 4th, 88, it would be a first cut.
This is another area where I'm very confused, and perhaps we could learn more through a more comprehensive discussion.
Right.
Do we have, so Karen, this is, I mean, because of the date that's in here, that's specifically in here, do we have a map of January 3rd, 1988 of all the subdivisions? Because without that, we can't enforce this.
Well,
No, that sort of thing, Phil, is done by research in,
yeah,
it's not a map, it's
Okay.
physical research into
Yeah.
deeds, et cetera, et cetera. It's,
Okay.
if we were to go by the map and the lines, we would be in,
Okay, no, just asking. So, I mean,
Yeah.
but basically it's just saying that if you're cutting up any piece of land into 3 pieces,
it's a subdivision.
which is a subdivision, after that was not if it existed if it existed after January 4th, 88, and you cut it into 3 pieces, then it's a subdivision.
Mhm.
Correct. Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think it's important to note the onus in any situation is on the property owner to bring any application before Karen, and often title searchers have to get involved to discern whether or not a first cut has already occurred, if it is a third cut, which would trigger subdivision, or if it is a re-subdivision. And
We actually usually ask for a legal opinion, a written legal opinion on that.
Okay.
because it is so nuanced with each parcel.
Yep.
It's such a lot specific thing.
Okay.
And then we get into traditional lodgings. So this becomes sort of the catch-all for hotel, motel, or inn. A more rather than discerning amongst them, the use is very similar.
Yeah.
So traditional lodging is commercial use, a temporary place for guests. And then I have a few definitions to be defined, but also some thoughts are just other uses that are mentioned within the zoning regulations but are never defined. Should we go about working on definitions? That's something I'll do between meetings. And then other words to consider are just words that come up often in our regulations. It's understood temporary versus permanent, short-term versus long-term is going to be tackled. But then do we want to talk about owner occupation versus owner occupied? Because that
Mhm.
Yep.
that can be
All
a very
good.
particular
Yes, we
thing.
do.
Yep.
Okay. And then I don't know if we want to at this juncture, but just keeping in mind the recent updates to legislation around adult recreational cannabis, there are some new definitions that are making their way into zoning regulations. My sense with our exercise before us, we're doing a lot of the housekeeping and the reorganization. So rather than introduce like very new concepts based on legislation, to leave them out for now.
I think
Agreed.
that if we have the
My
time, it's
preference.
worth defining them and having them sort of on the side so that, if we ever,
They're
Yeah, as soon
already
as we actually
defined
have
in the
time.
legislation, Phil.
Indeed,
Well, then
yes.
fine.
So,
But
yeah.
it has to do.
it's
with-
easy to include them when we want to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're already in the legislation.
Fine.
That
Yeah.
legislation was very, very thoroughly written. It's over 100 pages long,
Yeah, and it's very technical and very
very technical. I
yeah.
made the mistake of reading it.
So
We
I
loved
guess my question for the group is just around these uses that are utilized within the regulations but aren't defined. They're permissible uses. Some of them will be a bit hard to define, but should the commission wish, I can certainly take a stab at,
I think
Getting
the only one I personally think is important to add would be a definition of multifamily housing. But we
Okay.
can always wait for the point in time where, that comes under consideration as a regulatory amendment.
okay,
Yeah, no,
So we could wait on that.
I
We
think the
talked
more that we
about,
can define, the
Airbnb.
better.
And
This is
James, you
Bruce.
had something else to say.
Do we talk about Airbnb stuff anywhere? Or do we not want
not,
to touch that?
I mean, we haven't, we obviously certainly can, because, and
That
that's what-
means
It's kind of
short-term
interesting if
versus
with
long-term rental.
traditional lodging, it would
Yeah.
fall into that by definition as we define it.
Yep. So would bed and breakfast.
Yeah,
sorry, it would, in your opinion, it would or it would not? It
It
would?
would.
I think it does.
It's a
Yeah,
commercial
but
use.
we don't
Yeah.
spell it out. I don't know.
Yeah.
Didn't we defined commercial use as the exchange of the,
Goods or services
yeah, goods or services, and providing lodging is a good service.
and bartering.
So we should add traditional bed and breakfast.
No, I don't think we have to. I think it's already, it's unwritten, but it falls within, it just says such as hotel or motel.
Oh,
Hotel,
sure,
motel, or inn.
Bill.
Such as-
There- this raises the point too, bed and breakfast might actually be defined separate and distinctly, because oftentimes bed and breakfast can be seen in residential areas, and they're very, I'll have to revisit the regulations. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but they're very regulated around number of rooms, number of guests, and I believe it's implicit that there is a residence living on that property, which would
Yeah,
be
we have
very
a whole
different.
section for that. Yeah.
Yeah, which would be very different than traditional lodging,
Right.
but it
Right.
might be worth defining bed and breakfast within the definition section.
Well, Airbnb, that way, if you're renting only a room out, could be different than a traditional lodging too, and might not fall under it it would fall more into the sort of into the bed and breakfast category then.
Where
Since we are
I,
not currently regulating Airbnb, we can also save that discussion for when we have a regulation amendment. Could we please?
Yep.
Okay, because I want Janelle to go have her dinner.
okay.
My brain hurts. I think we should sign off for now. We did
Okay.
a lot of work tonight. That was 54 definitions.
Mhm.
And so proud of how you all contributed to the discussion. I should
Thank you.
shut up more.
Yeah.
Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Yes,
So moved.
move to adjourn.
Okay, we've got, you can choose who you want to put in the minutes, Karen, and can we take a vote on adjournment? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you,
Good night.
thank you. We'll see you in a month.
Good night.
Birthday,
Good
Janelle.
night.
Happy
Thanks.
birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, Janelle, and
Thanks,
thank you
guys.
for working.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.